Hey guys, tonight we journey back in time, not just centuries, but millennia, to a land that lies beneath the very waves you might sail today. Imagine, if you will, standing on a vast, fertile plain, the wind whispering through ancient trees, the roar of a distant mammoth echoing across the landscape. You're not in some fantasy realm, oh no. You're on Doggerland, a place so real it shaped the very geography of Europe, a place so lost, you probably wouldn't survive a day there without a time-traveling survival kit and a really good map. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of a world utterly alien yet strangely familiar, a landscape unfurling before you that would humble any modern mapmaker. This isn't the North Sea as you know it. There are no oil rigs, no bustling shipping lanes, just an immense expanse of land, stretching further than the eye can see. To your left, where the misty shores of England would one day lie, you discern the faint outline of rolling hills. To your right, the distant forests hint at what will become the Netherlands and Denmark. You're straddling a forgotten continent, a colossal land bridge that once seamlessly connected what is now Great Britain to mainland Europe. This is Doggerland, a vast, fertile heartland that throbbed with life for thousands of years after the last great ice sheets began their slow retreat. Picture it, a colossal green carpet, roughly the size of modern-day Scotland or even larger, perhaps approaching the landmass of the entire Netherlands and Denmark combined. It's an area so immense, you could spend weeks, months even, traversing its very terrain without ever seeing the same vista twice. Forget your cramped modern cities. Here, the horizon stretches endlessly, punctuated only by ancient oak forests, shimmering river valleys, and vast, open grasslands. You breathe in the crisp, clean air, carrying the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and something wild, perhaps the faint musk of a distant herd. The silence, broken only by the wind and the calls of unseen birds, is profound, a stark contrast to the relentless hum of 21st century life. You might find yourself wondering how anyone could possibly get lost here, and then you remember there's no GPS, no phone signal, and certainly no helpful little blue dot to guide your way. It's an adventurer's dream, or perhaps, depending on your love for modern amenities, a very sleepy, very long nightmare. This wasn't some barren, desolate tundra. Oh no. Doggerland was a thriving, vibrant ecosystem, a true Garden of Eden for the Mesolithic people who called it home. Imagine broad, meandering rivers, fed by the meltwaters of distant glaciers, carving deep, fertile valleys through the landscape. These aren't just streams. These are mighty arteries, like the ancient Rhine, Thames, and Meuse, converging into a colossal, Dogger River, system that flowed northwards, eventually emptying into what would one day become the Norwegian Sea. You can almost hear the rush of water, the gentle lapping against the banks as salmon, fatter and more plentiful than anything you've ever seen, leap against the current. The river banks are lush, dense with reeds and willows, providing perfect cover for countless species of waterfowl. Beyond the rivers, you find yourself amidst sprawling temperate forests, dominated by oak, elm, and lime trees, their ancient branches reaching towards a sky that feels impossibly vast. Sunlight filters through the dense canopy, dappling the forest floor, which is thick with ferns, moss, and wildflowers. This isn't a manicured park, it's wild, untamed, and bursting with energy. You might stumble upon a clearing where wild boar root around for acorns, or catch a glimpse of a European elk, its massive antlers silhouetted against the setting sun. Deer, red and roe, dart through the undergrowth, their movements fluid and graceful. And if you're lucky, or perhaps unlucky, depending on your perspective, you might even spot a pack of wolves, their eyes gleaming in the twilight, reminding you that you are very much a part of the food chain here. It's a land teeming with life, a biologist's dream, an ancient version of a national park, but without the gift shop or the overly enthusiastic park rangers. And amongst this incredible biodiversity lived people. Not just a few scattered individuals, but thriving communities of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, adapted to this rich, abundant landscape. You might see the faint wisps of smoke curling from a distant encampment, smell the wood smoke on the wind, perhaps even hear the distant chatter of human voices. These were sophisticated societies, not primitive cave dwellers. They understood the rhythms of the land, the migration patterns of animals, the seasonal cycles of plants. They were intimately connected to their environment, their lives woven into the very fabric of Doggerland. Their tools, crafted from flint, bone, and antler, were remarkably effective for hunting, fishing, and processing the bounty of their world. You might, if you were to look closely at the ground beneath your feet, spot a discarded flint blade, still sharp after millennia, a tangible link to those who walked here before the waves claimed it all. In fact, one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for Doggerland's human habitation is the discovery of a barbed bone point, a sophisticated fishing spear tip, dredged up by a fishing trawler in 1931 from what is now the North Sea, miles from any modern coastline. It was a clear sign that people were indeed living and hunting in this submerged realm. The climate, during the early Mesolithic period, would have been milder than the preceding Ice Age, but still cooler than today. You'd feel a crispness in the air, even in summer, a freshness that hints at the lingering influence of those vast ice sheets to the north. Yet, it was warm enough to support those dense forests and abundant wildlife. The land was not flat and uniform. It featured rolling hills, ancient river terraces, and even some higher ground that would later become islands. Imagine the Dogger Bank, now a relatively shallow sandbank, as a prominent plateau, a true high point in the landscape, offering sweeping views of the surrounding plains and waterways. It was a strategic point, surely, for hunters to survey the movements of herds. Life here was a constant dance with nature, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. You see evidence of their presence everywhere, the faint traces of ancient hearths, the scatter of flint tools, perhaps even the remnants of a temporary shelter built from hides and branches. These weren't permanent settlements in the modern sense, but rather seasonal camps, moved to follow game or exploit seasonal resources like berry patches or fish runs. They were masters of their domain, navigating the vast network of rivers and trails, their knowledge of the land passed down through generations. Historians still argue whether Doggerland was primarily a migration corridor for people moving between continents, or if it was a distinct, settled homeland with a unique cultural identity. But the sheer volume of archaeological finds certainly suggests a significant, long-term human presence. It wasn't just a bridge, it was a destination. As you stand here, feeling the ancient earth beneath your feet, listening to the timeless sounds of this forgotten world, it's almost impossible to imagine that this entire landscape, this vibrant, living heartland, would one day be swallowed whole by the sea. It feels so solid, so eternal. You try to picture the waves crashing here, the salt spray on your face, but the image simply doesn't compute. It's a land of secrets, buried deep beneath the waves, waiting for us to uncover its stories. And the story of Doggerland, this lost world unveiled, is just beginning. Alright, curl up a little tighter now, because our story takes us back, way back, to a time when the world wasn't quite the globe you see on maps today. We're going to peel back the layers of millennia, like turning the pages of an impossibly slow-motion geological flipbook. To truly grasp Doggerland's watery farewell, you first need to understand the colossal, slow-motion drama that set the stage, the last ice age, and its reluctant, creaking departure. Imagine, if you will, the world not just colder, but heavy. In the northern hemisphere, colossal sheets of ice, miles thick in places, pressed down on the land. These aren't just frozen puddles. These are continental-scale blankets of ancient, compressed snow and ice. They stretch across what we now call Scandinavia, much of Canada, and even parts of northern Europe, including what would eventually become Britain. You can almost feel the chills seeping into your bones just thinking about it, can't you? This wasn't just a winter. It was a winter that lasted for tens of thousands of years. Think of the ultimate weighted blanket, but instead of comforting you, it's squashing entire continents. During the peak of this glacial epoch, known as the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, an astonishing amount of the Earth's water was locked up in these gargantuan ice sheets. We're talking about so much water that global sea levels plummeted. They dropped by approximately 120 meters. That's like 2.5 Big Bens stacked on top of each other, all underwater, suddenly becoming dry land. This dramatic drop in sea level is the first and most crucial geological force in our story, because it's what unveiled Doggerland in the first place. The North Sea Basin, which today separates Britain from Europe, became a vast, undulating plain, crisscrossed by ancient rivers and dotted with low hills. It was a bridge, a land bridge, connecting what is now East Anglia to the Netherlands and Denmark. Not a precarious, narrow strip, mind you, but a sprawling, habitable landscape. But the Ice Age, like all good things, or bad, depending on your perspective, eventually had to loosen its grip. Around 18,000 years ago, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift began. The Earth's climate, for reasons scientists still continue to debate, started to warm. The relentless cold began to recede, and with it, the titanic ice sheets began to melt. This wasn't a sudden gush like a tap being turned on. It was a slow, majestic retreat, punctuated by periods of faster melt and occasional, frustrating pauses. Think of a giant ice cube slowly dripping in a vast, cold room, but sometimes someone opens a window, and it drips a bit faster. As the glaciers thawed, they unleashed torrents of meltwater, which carved out new river valleys, reshaped existing landscapes, and most importantly for us, flowed back into the oceans. This returning water caused global sea levels to creep steadily upwards. It's like slowly filling a bathtub. The water level rises, inexorably, covering more and more of the bottom. For Doggerland, this meant its edges, its lowest lying areas, were the first to feel the encroaching wetness. Now, here's where another fascinating geological force comes into play: isostatic rebound. Imagine those massive ice sheets, weighing down the Earth's crust. The land beneath them literally sank under the immense pressure, like a memory foam mattress adjusting to your weight. But when the ice melted and the weight was removed, the land began to slowly, ever so slowly, spring back up, like that mattress regaining its shape. It's a bit like the land taking a deep, slow breath after being held underwater for millennia. The funny part? This rebound doesn't happen instantly, and it doesn't happen uniformly. The areas that were under the thickest ice rebound the most, and they rebound at different rates. So, while sea levels were rising globally, some parts of the land were also rising, creating a complex, dynamic interplay of forces. It's enough to make an ancient geologist throw their hands up and wish for a bigger whiteboard. This differential rebound meant that Doggerland wasn't simply a flat plain waiting to be submerged. Its terrain was shaped by these ancient forces. Its higher ground, like the area that would eventually become the Dogger Bank, yes, the very same Dogger Bank where fishing trawlers operate today, was once a series of low hills and ridges. The lowest parts were ancient riverbeds and floodplains, etched out by the very meltwater that would eventually drown them. The landscape was also influenced by what are called periglacial processes, fancy word for what happens around the glaciers. Think of the land just beyond the ice sheets. It was a frozen wasteland of permafrost, where the ground was permanently frozen. As the ice retreated, this permafrost would thaw, causing the ground to become unstable. You might have seen strange, circular mounds formed by ice pushing up the earth. These are called pingos, and they were a common, if quirky, feature of this thawing landscape. Imagine walking across a field dotted with these mini ice volcanoes, like lumpy, frozen molehills on a grand scale. So you have these two titans, ice and land, locked in a slow-motion dance. The ice recedes, the land rises, but the oceans rise faster. This wasn't a gentle, predictable rise either. The meltwater didn't flow smoothly like a garden hose. There were colossal, catastrophic floods from melting glacial lakes, sudden bursts of water that would have temporarily surged sea levels even higher. These weren't the final blows, but they were certainly powerful foreshadowings of the watery fate awaiting Doggerland. The stage was set. The Ice Age's grip had loosened, revealing a vast, fertile land. But the very forces that created it, the locking up and then releasing of the Earth's water, were now poised to reclaim it. Doggerland was, in a sense, living on borrowed time, a temporary reprieve from the deep blue, its ultimate destiny sealed by the slow, relentless power of melting ice and rising seas. Imagine, if you will, standing on this vast, ancient landscape, not as a lone explorer, but as a member of a thriving community. This isn't just a desolate plain, it's a living, breathing world, teeming with life, and most importantly, with people. You are one of them, a Mesolithic hunter-gatherer, and Doggerland is your home. The dawn arrives not with a blaring alarm, but with the gentle chorus of birdsong filtering through the branches of the ancient oak you've made your temporary shelter. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth, wood smoke from last night's fire, and the distant, earthy tang of the sprawling wetlands. You stir, your muscles protesting slightly from a night spent on a bed of bracken, but the call of the day, the need for sustenance, pulls you up. Your community, perhaps 20 or 30 strong, is a tight-knit band of kin. Grandparents, parents, children, all move with a practiced ease, their lives interwoven with the rhythms of the land. There's no rush hour here, no frantic scramble for coffee. Your morning ritual involves sharing a few berries or a piece of dried meat from yesterday's hunt, exchanging quiet words, and preparing for the day's tasks. The younger ones, full of boundless energy, are already chasing each other through the trees, their laughter echoing briefly before being absorbed by the vastness. You stretch, feeling the cool morning air on your skin. Your clothes, likely made from animal hides, are practical and warm, designed for a life spent outdoors. You might even have some rather stylish bone beads or polished amber adornments, because even back then, people enjoyed a bit of flair. After all, who wants to look like a complete slob when you're trying to impress that attractive hunter from the next family band? The day begins with purpose. Some of your group, often the younger, swifter men and women, prepare for the hunt. They check their spears, tipped with meticulously knapped flint points, sharp enough to pierce thick hide. Others ready bows and arrows, the wooden shafts straight and true, the fletching made from bird feathers. You might be among the gatherers, heading out with woven baskets, your eyes scanning the undergrowth for the telltale signs of edible plants, wild carrots, water lilies, hazelnuts, or the sweet burst of wild berries. You know this land intimately, every curve of its rivers, every rise of its hills, every seasonal offering it provides. This isn't just a walk in the park, it's a living encyclopedia of sustenance. The Mesolithic people of Doggerland weren't just surviving, they were thriving. This land, crisscrossed by mighty rivers, dotted with freshwater lakes, and covered in dense forests and open grasslands, was an ecological goldmine. Imagine vast herds of red deer, wild boar, and even aurochs, the ancient, colossal ancestors of modern cattle, grazing in the open plains. For a hunter, it was like having a supermarket where all the aisles were full of very large, very wild meat. Though, to be fair, they didn't have shopping carts, which made the trip home a bit more strenuous. Your community's success hinges on a profound understanding of the environment. You know where the salmon run, when the berries ripen, and which migratory birds will pass through. You're not just a passive observer, you're an active participant in this ecosystem, a skilled predator and an expert forager. You might even have domesticated dogs by your side, descendants of wolves, loyal companions who aid in the hunt and provide an extra set of ears for danger. These aren't pampered lapdogs, mind you, they're working animals, though they probably still enjoyed a good belly rub after a long day. Archaeological finds from sites across Europe confirm that Mesolithic communities were incredibly resourceful. They didn't just rely on stone tools, they mastered bone, antler, and wood. You might spend hours carving a fishhook from a piece of bone, or shaping a paddle from a fallen tree branch. The efficiency of their tools, often surprisingly delicate and precise, allowed them to process food, construct shelters, and craft intricate items. For instance, the discovery of finely crafted barbed points, perfect for spearing fish or small game, speaks volumes about their ingenuity. These weren't crude implements. They were specialized tools, honed over generations. Life was mobile, following the resources. You wouldn't build permanent villages, but rather establish seasonal camps. In the summer, you might be closer to the coast, exploiting the rich marine life, shellfish, fish, and perhaps even seals. In autumn, you'd move inland, focusing on the nut harvest and the great deer migrations. Your shelters would be temporary, easily constructed from branches and hides, offering protection from the elements, but allowing for quick relocation when the larder needed restocking. It was the ultimate work from anywhere lifestyle, long before Wi-Fi was even a twinkle in anyone's eye. Socially, these communities were likely egalitarian. There wasn't a king or a queen, but rather respected elders, skilled hunters, and wise gatherers who guided the group through consensus. Decisions were made collectively, ensuring the survival and well-being of everyone. Stories would be told around the evening fire, tales of great hunts, of ancestral spirits, and perhaps even of the stars above. Though we can only speculate, it's easy to imagine a rich oral tradition, passing down knowledge and cultural values from one generation to the next. One mainstream historical fact about the Mesolithic period is that these groups were not simply primitive cavemen, but highly adaptable and intelligent people who developed complex social structures and technologies tailored to their diverse environments. They were innovators, constantly refining their methods to extract the most from their surroundings. Their understanding of flora and fauna was encyclopedic, far surpassing what most modern humans could ever hope to grasp about their immediate environment. A quirky tidbit that hints at their sophisticated understanding of their world comes from a few rare finds of Mesolithic art. While not as prolific as the cave paintings of the Paleolithic, some small, portable objects have been found adorned with intricate geometric patterns or stylized animal figures. This suggests an aesthetic sense, a desire for beauty beyond mere utility, hinting at a rich inner life and a complex symbolic world. Perhaps they even had their own version of abstract art, leaving modern scholars to ponder if it was a map, a spiritual symbol, or just a really cool doodle. Historians still argue whether the Mesolithic communities of Doggerland maintained extensive trade networks with groups on what would become mainland Europe and Britain, or if they were largely self-sufficient, only occasionally encountering outsiders. It's a fascinating debate, as evidence for long-distance exchange of materials like specific types of flint or amber does exist, suggesting a surprisingly interconnected world, even in a time before paved roads or express delivery. As the sun begins to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, you return to camp, perhaps with a basket heavy with hazelnuts, or a piece of freshly caught fish. The smell of wood smoke fills the air, mingling with the aroma of roasting meat. The day's work transitions into communal feasting, storytelling, and the simple comfort of shared warmth. Children, tired from their play, huddle close to their parents. The elders offer quiet wisdom, their eyes reflecting the flickering firelight, filled with the accumulated knowledge of generations. This was life on Doggerland, vibrant, challenging, but profoundly connected to the earth. It was a place where human ingenuity met abundant nature, where communities thrived in harmony with their surroundings. The land offered everything they needed, and they, in turn, understood its every secret. They believed, perhaps, that this fertile world would endure forever, a timeless stage for their lives. But beneath their feet, the very ground they walked upon was subtly, imperceptibly, preparing for a change far grander and more devastating than any they could ever imagine. The whispers had already begun. Now, imagine stepping back in time, not just a few centuries, but tens of thousands of years. You've just traversed the vast expanse that will one day become the North Sea. But right now, you're standing on firm, verdant ground. This isn't just any land, it's Doggerland, the true hunter-gatherer's paradise, a sprawling Eden that makes modern national parks look like postage stamps. As you breathe in, the air is clean, crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and something wild, a promise of life teeming just beyond your sight. You trudge deeper into this ancient landscape, and immediately, you're struck by the sheer, unadulterated richness of it all. This isn't a barren, windswept tundra, despite its proximity to the retreating ice sheets. Oh no. This is a land shaped by the very forces that once held the world in an icy grip, now blossoming under a warming sun. The topography is surprisingly varied, a gentle undulation of rolling hills, broad river valleys, and low-lying plains. It's a landscape that whispers tales of ancient rivers, fed by glacial meltwaters, carving their way to a distant sea, creating a network of waterways that would have been the lifeblood of this entire region. You push through a thicket of hazel and alder, their branches heavy with nuts and catkins, a veritable supermarket for the taking. The ground underfoot is a soft carpet of moss and fallen leaves, damp from a recent shower. Overhead, the canopy closes in, a majestic ceiling of towering trees. We're talking about sprawling forests here, not just scattered groves. Imagine ancient oak, elm, and lime trees, their gnarled branches reaching skyward like the arms of venerable giants, providing shelter, food, and the raw materials for tools and warmth. These weren't just pretty backdrops, they were the very fabric of existence. Sunlight filters through the leaves in dappled patterns, painting shifting mosaics on the forest floor. You can almost hear the soft rustle of unseen creatures, the gentle hum of insects, and the distant call of birds echoing through the ancient woods. It's so quiet, you can hear your own heartbeat, a rhythmic thrum against the vast silence. It makes you wonder how anyone ever found their way around without GPS. I mean, imagine trying to meet up with your hunting buddies in a forest this big. Just meet me by the really big oak tree. Good luck with that. As you venture further, the forest gradually opens up into expansive grasslands, dotted with corpses of trees and crisscrossed by meandering rivers. And this is where the true spectacle begins. The biodiversity of Doggerland was simply astonishing, a testament to its unique position as a land bridge and a post-glacial haven. This wasn't just a place where things survived, it was a place where life flourished. Look out across that wide plain. Do you see them? Herds of majestic red deer, their antlers like intricate crowns, graze peacefully, occasionally raising their heads to sniff the air. They are abundant, their numbers beyond anything we see in Europe today, a constant, rich source of food and hides for the Mesolithic people. And not just red deer. You'd also spot herds of wild horses, their manes flowing in the breeze, thundering across the plains with an untamed grace. These weren't the domesticated ponies of today. These were powerful, resilient animals, providing fast-moving targets and another vital food source. It's like watching a real-life nature documentary, but without the annoying narrator whispering facts at you. Oh, wait. Further afield, you might glimpse the shaggy forms of bison, their immense shoulders rippling with muscle as they chew cud, seemingly indifferent to your presence. But the true giants of this landscape, the rock stars of the ancient plains, were the aurochs. Now, if you think modern cattle are big, you haven't met an auroch. These were colossal wild bovines, standing over 6 feet tall at the shoulder, with massive, forward-curving horns that could easily skewer a small car, if cars existed back then. Imagine trying to get one of those onto your dinner plate. It's believed they were significantly larger and more formidable than any cattle we know today, making them a truly challenging, yet incredibly rewarding, hunt for the Doggerland inhabitants. This sheer abundance of large game, red deer, wild horses, bison, and particularly the aurochs, formed the backbone of sustenance for the Mesolithic communities, providing not only meat but also bone, hide, and sinew for tools, clothing, and shelter. This is a mainstream historical fact that underscores just how rich this environment was. But it wasn't just the megafauna that made Doggerland a paradise. Look down at the river that winds lazily through the valley. Its clear waters teem with life. Salmon, trout, and eels are plentiful, making their way upstream, providing an easy and dependable protein source. You can almost see the flash of silver as a fish leaps from the water. The riverbanks are alive with otters and beavers, busy at their work, their movements a testament to the health of the ecosystem. Along the shores, you might spot various waterfowl, ducks, geese, swans, nesting in the reeds, their calls echoing softly across the water. The air itself is a symphony of birdsong. From the melodic trills of smaller songbirds hidden in the trees to the majestic flight of eagles soaring high above, the skies were just as vibrant as the land and water. And beneath your feet, the soil itself was rich, supporting a vast array of edible plants, berries, roots, and fungi. While the focus is often on the dramatic hunts, the Mesolithic people were incredibly skilled foragers, their knowledge of the local flora encyclopedic. They knew which plants provided nutrition, which offered medicinal properties, and which were best avoided. It was a holistic relationship with the land, one born of deep understanding and respect. The Mesolithic hunter-gatherers who called this place home weren't just surviving, they were thriving. They lived in harmony with the rhythms of nature, moving with the seasons, following the migrations of the animals, and harvesting the bounty of the land and water. Their tools, crafted from flint, bone, and antler, were finely honed instruments, designed to maximize efficiency in hunting, fishing, and processing resources. They developed sophisticated hunting techniques, from ambushes in the forests to cooperative drives on the open plains. Archaeologists still debate the primary hunting methods used for some of the larger, more dangerous animals like the aurochs, whether it was more about trapping, coordinated group attacks, or even exploiting their natural behaviors during specific seasons. Imagine the knowledge passed down through generations, the best fishing spots, the most reliable berry patches, the migratory routes of the deer, the subtle signs that indicated the presence of game. Their lives were active, yes, but also deeply connected to their environment. They didn't need fitness trackers. Their daily existence was an extreme workout, fueled by fresh, organic food straight from nature's pantry. It was a life of constant engagement with the wild, a visceral connection to the land that most of us can only dream of. This was Doggerland, a land of immense natural wealth, a vibrant tapestry of forests, rivers, and plains teeming with life. It was a true Garden of Eden for those who knew how to live within its bounty, a place where humans were not masters, but deeply integrated participants in a grand, wild ecosystem. But as we know, even paradise has its expiry date. Now settle in, my friends, because we're about to enter a phase of Doggerland's story that's less about dramatic roars and more about the quiet, insidious creep of change. Imagine yourself back on that vast, verdant landscape, perhaps by a meandering river, or strolling along what you assume is a stable coastline. The air is crisp, the sun warms your face, and life, as you know it, is utterly dependable. But beneath the surface of this seeming permanence, something is beginning to stir. It's the very first, almost imperceptible whisper of the waters, the initial, slow, relentless ascent of the sea. You see, after the titanic grip of the Ice Age had begun to loosen its hold, the world's colossal ice sheets, some miles thick, weren't just vanishing overnight. Oh no, that would be far too dramatic for this particular chapter. Instead, think of it as a gargantuan ice cube, slowly, almost reluctantly, melting in a very, very big glass. The meltwater, over millennia, began to trickle, then flow, then eventually gush into the global ocean basins. But in these initial stages, the change was so infinitesimal, so glacially slow, that if you were standing on the Doggerland coast, patiently watching the tide come in, you wouldn't have noticed a thing. It's like trying to watch your hair grow, or paint dry, but over the course of centuries. Seriously, if you blinked, you'd miss a millennium of change. These were the days when the sea wasn't crashing against new shores but merely nudging them. Imagine the most placid, zen-like pond you've ever seen, and then picture its surface rising by the thickness of a few sheets of paper each year. That's the kind of imperceptible shift we're talking about. The Doggerland coastline, which we imagined as a vibrant, teeming edge of land, wasn't suddenly crumbling into the waves. Instead, the water table inland might have begun to rise ever so slightly, making certain low-lying areas just a tiny bit soggier. Perhaps a favorite berry bush that used to thrive on a particular patch of ground started to look a little less vibrant, its roots finding the soil just a touch too damp. For the Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, living their rich, adaptable lives, these changes wouldn't have registered as global warming or sea level rise. They didn't have satellite data or tide charts, bless their resourceful hearts. Instead, their observations would have been far more localized, more anecdotal. Maybe the spring tide came in a little further this year than last. Perhaps a familiar fishing spot in an estuary became unexpectedly brackish, or a favorite route across a low-lying marsh became impassable for a few more days after a heavy rain. It would have been less about the ocean rising, and more about the land feeling different, softer, wetter, in subtle, unquantifiable ways. Grandpa, remember when we could walk across that mud flat at low tide? Seems like it's always underwater now. That kind of whisper. This initial phase of rising waters wasn't just about the sheer volume of meltwater, however. It was also intricately linked to a fascinating geological phenomenon known as isostatic rebound. Now, don't let that fancy term put you to sleep just yet. Think of it this way. The colossal weight of the ice sheets had actually depressed the Earth's crust in some areas, rather like pressing your thumb into a soft cushion. As the ice melted, this cushion slowly began to spring back up, a process that continues even today in parts of Scandinavia. But here's the kicker for Doggerland. While northern Britain and Scandinavia were experiencing this uplift, Doggerland itself, being further south and having been less directly weighed down by the thickest ice, was actually experiencing a relative subsidence in some areas as the surrounding land rebounded and the ocean basins filled. So, you had a double whammy: global sea levels rising, **** change, the mainstream historical fact here, and parts of Doggerland gently sinking relative to that rising water, making the encroachment even more effective in certain spots. It's like trying to bail out a leaky boat while someone's also quietly adding water from a hosepipe. The rate of this early rise was truly astonishingly slow by our modern human perception. We're talking perhaps a few millimeters a year, at most. That's less than the thickness of a credit card. Imagine trying to notice that change on a vast, sprawling coastline over a single lifetime. You simply wouldn't. A child born on the coast would grow old and perhaps die without ever truly comprehending that the sea had risen by more than a few feet over their entire lifespan. It wasn't a visible tide mark creeping up a rock face. It was a pervasive, almost ghostly expansion. The very edges of the land were subtly blurring, becoming less defined, less solid. This imperceptible creep meant that the early ecological adaptations were equally subtle. Perhaps you'd find a quirky tidbit here: certain salt-tolerant plants, like specific types of glasswort or sea aster, might have gradually started to colonize areas further inland than they ever had before, pushing against the freshwater vegetation. Or maybe particular species of estuarine fish, accustomed to a certain salinity, would gradually shift their spawning grounds slightly upstream, following the subtle change in the water chemistry. It was a slow-motion biological dance, choreographed by the rising tide. And this leads us to a fascinating point of discussion amongst academics. Historians still argue whether the earliest Doggerland inhabitants, during this phase of the whisper, even consciously perceived the change as a threat or simply as part of the natural, unpredictable variability of their world. They lived in a dynamic landscape, after all, with shifting river courses and seasonal floods. Was this just another form of that variability, or did a wise elder occasionally point to the horizon and muse about the sea feeling a little closer than it used to? It's hard to say definitively, isn't it? Without a long-term data set, any change that unfolds over centuries can easily be dismissed as just how things are. This slow, creeping nature of the change is actually quite relatable to us today. How often do we notice a very gradual shift in our own lives, a slight increase in something, or a subtle reduction, that only becomes apparent when we look back over years? It's human nature to adjust, to normalize, to procrastinate on noticing the truly slow stuff. Oh, the water's a bit higher today. Must be the moon, or that big storm last week. Never mind that the big storm was 3 months ago and the water's still higher. That's the Doggerland story for a long, long time in this phase. So, the land wasn't drowning, it was simply becoming a little more saturated. The air, perhaps, carried a faint, briny scent just a little further inland than it had before. The sound of distant waves, once muted by miles of dry land, might have become a whisper you heard a few more times a year, carried on a prevailing breeze. These were not the sounds of catastrophe, but the gentle, persistent murmur of a world in quiet transition. The ground beneath your feet, especially near the coasts, might have felt just a fraction softer, a little more yielding, as if the land itself was sighing under the subtle pressure of the encroaching liquid. Over many generations, of course, the cumulative effect of these tiny, annual increments would become undeniable. What was once a subtle observation by a great-grandparent would become a known reality for their descendants. the family's ancestral fishing spot might now be permanently submerged. The old hunting trails along the coast might now require a canoe. But for now, in this section, we are in the era of the first whisper. The land is still vast, fertile, and abundant. The changes are so slow, so insidious, that they are easily absorbed into the daily rhythm of life. The Doggerland people are still thriving, still adapting, unaware that this gentle whisper is merely the prelude to a much louder, more insistent call from the deep. Now, if the previous subtle whispers of rising waters felt like a gentle, if slightly ominous, background hum, prepare yourself. Because what comes next isn't a whisper at all. It's the geological equivalent of a rock concert, a full-blown orchestral crescendo where Mother Nature decides it's time for a very, very long shower. You are now stepping into the era of the Great Thaw accelerates. Imagine, if you will, standing on what feels like the edge of the world. Not the flat, falling off the edge kind, but the kind where the vast, white, frozen expanse of the last ice age begins to crack and groan with a terrifying new energy. The sun, growing steadily warmer, isn't just melting the surface of these colossal ice sheets anymore. It's digging in, getting serious. You can practically hear the ice sighing in resignation as it lets go of its ancient grip on the land. Picture the colossal Scandinavian ice sheet, a behemoth that once stretched for thousands of miles across northern Europe, towering perhaps a mile or two high in places. And across the Atlantic, the even vaster Laurentide ice sheet, smothering much of North America. These weren't just big blocks of ice. They were continental-scale blankets, pressing down on the Earth's crust with unimaginable weight. For millennia, they had held vast quantities of water captive, locking it away in their frozen hearts. But now, the locks were failing. You feel a subtle tremor beneath your feet, not an earthquake, but something more profound. It's the sheer weight of meltwater, cascading off the edges of these colossal ice masses. It's like watching 1,000 waterfalls appear out of nowhere, each one a roaring testament to the planet's shifting climate. Glaciers, once sluggish and ponderous, now seem to be speeding up, calving off icebergs the size of small towns with thunderous cracks that echo for miles across the newly exposed landscape. It's a magnificent, terrifying spectacle. The water isn't just trickling, it's gushing. Rivers that were once modest streams, perhaps fed by snowmelt, swell into raging torrents, carving new channels and overflowing their banks with a ferocity you've never witnessed. You see the land, still recovering from the crushing weight of the ice, being scoured clean, valleys deepening, and ancient landscapes being reshaped in what feels like geological speed dating. This period, roughly between 15,000 and 8,000 years ago, witnessed a truly staggering amount of sea level rise. To put it into perspective, globally, sea levels rose by over 120 meters. That's nearly 400 feet. Imagine an entire 40-story skyscraper disappearing beneath the waves. Now imagine that happening everywhere. It wasn't a steady, predictable rise either. Oh no, Mother Nature doesn't do predictable when she's in a hurry. There were distinct periods, often referred to by scientists as meltwater pulses, where the rate of sea level rise dramatically accelerated. It was like the planet was holding its breath, then letting out a series of enormous, watery exhales. One moment, the sea might be rising at a few millimeters a year, barely noticeable. The next, it could be a meter or two per century, or even faster during these pulses. Imagine waking up one morning, looking out, and realizing your beachfront property just became oceanfront property, and by the end of the year, your oceanfront property is now a fishing spot for the local aquatic life. Try getting a refund on that property tax bill. These meltwater pulses were not just about the sheer volume of water. They were also about the speed at which it was unleashed. Think of it like a dam bursting, but on a continental scale, over and over again. The scientific community has spent years studying the precise timing and magnitude of these events, trying to pinpoint exactly which ice sheets contributed how much and when. Indeed, geologists still debate the precise mechanisms and exact timings of these rapid meltwater pulses, trying to unravel the complex interplay between warming temperatures, ice sheet dynamics, and ocean currents. It's a bit like trying to choreograph a ballet with 1,000 clumsy giants, each melting at their own pace. The water, relentless and unstoppable, found its way into every low-lying basin, every valley, every ancient riverbed. For Doggerland, this was the beginning of the end. The land bridge, once so expansive and welcoming, was now under assault from all sides. The ancient rivers, which once flowed peacefully across the plain, became conduits for this new, immense volume of water, carving wider, deeper paths, transforming into estuaries that stretched for miles inland. You can almost feel the dampness in the air, a constant mist rising from the newly formed wetlands and expanding coastlines. The sound of water is omnipresent, the roar of distant meltwater rivers, the lapping of waves against newly formed shores, the constant drip 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 from every rock face and tree branch. If you were a Mesolithic hunter-gatherer, you might start to wonder if the sky was permanently weeping. Or perhaps you just assumed the local deity had developed a sudden, insatiable thirst. It wasn't just the rising sea levels, though that was certainly the main act. There was also a quirky, counterintuitive geological phenomenon at play, isostatic rebound. Think of it like this. When you press your thumb into a soft piece of dough, it makes an indentation. When you lift your thumb, the dough slowly, gradually springs back up. The Earth's crust behaved similarly. For thousands of years, the immense weight of those ice sheets had pressed down on the land beneath them, causing it to sink. As the ice melted, the pressure was relieved, and the land slowly began to rebound, or rise. Now, here's the tricky part. This rebound wasn't uniform. Areas directly beneath the thickest ice sheets, like parts of Scandinavia and Scotland, rose significantly. But areas around the edges of the ice sheets, like Doggerland, could sometimes experience a complex interplay of rising sea levels and localized sinking, or at least less rebound, because the weight of the water filling the newly deepened ocean basins exerted new pressure. So, while some parts of the world were literally bouncing back, Doggerland was, in essence, being gently, but firmly, pushed further down by the encroaching ocean. It's like being on a seesaw where one side is getting heavier and heavier, and you're stuck on the other end, slowly descending. The sheer scale of this transformation is hard to grasp. Coastlines globally were being redrawn at an astonishing pace. Lands that had been exposed for tens of thousands of years were now being swallowed by the sea. New islands were forming, old connections breaking. The geography of the entire planet was undergoing a radical, rapid makeover. You need a new map every few centuries, or perhaps even every few decades, just to keep up. It was nature's own demolition crew, reshaping the world with water as its primary tool. For the people of Doggerland, this was no abstract geological phenomenon. This was their daily reality. The rich plains, the sprawling forests, the familiar hunting grounds, they were shrinking. The sound of the sea, once a distant murmur, grew louder, more insistent. Every low-lying area, every fertile river delta, was becoming increasingly vulnerable. The pressure was building, not just in the water, but in the lives of the people who called this extraordinary, vanishing land their home. You could almost feel the collective anxiety as their world, quite literally, began to shrink around them. The whispers of change had become a roar, and it was only going to get louder. You stand now on the precipice of a profound transformation, feeling the very ground beneath your feet begin to soften, to yield. The relentless meltwaters we discussed, those colossal, shimmering rivers born of a thawing world, have not ceased their journey. Oh no, they've only intensified, a truly monumental, global bathtub filling up, and Doggerland, our beloved, sprawling continent connector, is right in the tub. You're not just seeing the edges of the land blur, you're witnessing an internal revolution, a remapping of the very arteries and veins of this ancient landscape. Imagine yourself perched on a low hill, perhaps a gentle rise that, until recently, was just another part of the undulating plain. Below you, the great river, the one you've known your whole life, is no longer the same. It's swollen, sluggish, and far, far wider than it was even a decade ago. Its banks, once firm and well-defined, are now soft, muddy fringes that seem to ripple and dissolve with every passing hour. The water, once a clear, rushing torrent, now has a murky, silty quality, carrying the churned-up remnants of newly submerged soil. It's like watching a well-behaved child suddenly decide to finger-paint the entire living room, beautiful in its own chaotic way, but definitely not what you signed up for. This isn't just a flood, mind you, this is a permanent expansion. The river isn't just overflowing its banks, it's creating new banks, miles inland from where they once lay. Picture the estuaries, those places where the rivers met the sea. They're no longer neat, funnel-shaped openings. Oh no. They've become vast, sprawling, brackish lakes, reaching deep into the land, like hungry tentacles searching for something to grasp. Where once you might have waded across a narrow ford, now you need a boat, and a sturdy one at that. The fresh water, once abundant and pure, begins to taste different, a subtle, metallic tang of salt creeping further and further upstream with each passing tide. It's like someone accidentally spilled a whole box of sea salt into your morning coffee, except the coffee is an entire river system, and this someone is Mother Nature herself, with a truly mischievous grin. You walk along what used to be a well-worn path beside the river, perhaps a route you used for generations to reach the best fishing spots. Now the path is gone, swallowed by the creeping water. The trees that once lined the bank, their roots clinging stubbornly to the soil, are now standing in water, their lower branches submerged, looking like mournful, drowned sentinels. Their leaves, once green and vibrant, begin to yellow, then brown, suffocated by the saline intrusion. This slow death of the riparian forests, those critical habitats for countless species, paints a poignant picture of the changing world. It's a botanical tragedy unfolding in slow motion, a silent, watery coup d'etat against the established order of flora. The river systems, once distinct and flowing independently, begin to merge in low-lying areas. What were once separate valleys become interconnected waterways, creating a labyrinthine network of channels and shallow lakes. Imagine trying to navigate this new world. Your mental map of the landscape, honed over a lifetime of hunting and gathering, is suddenly obsolete. You thought you knew this place, but it's constantly redrawing itself. It's like your favorite GPS app suddenly decides to update its maps every 5 minutes, but instead of adding new roads, it's just deleting the old ones and replacing them with puddles. Utterly unhelpful for your commute. This transformation wasn't uniform across Doggerland, of course. Some areas, higher and more resilient, held out longer, their rivers remaining somewhat contained. But the lower, flatter plains, particularly those crisscrossed by the ancient Dogger River system, a vast network of tributaries draining much of what is now the southern North Sea, were particularly vulnerable. This colossal river system, often considered the heart of Doggerland's freshwater supply, found itself under immense pressure. Its broad, meandering course, once a lifeline for communities, became a conduit for the encroaching sea. And then there are the coastlines. Oh, the coastlines. They didn't just retreat, they dissolved. The gentle slopes that once led down to the ancient shores were simply overwhelmed. Beaches, if they existed in the way we understand them today, vanished under the relentless lapping of the rising waves. Where there were once low cliffs, perhaps sculpted by ancient winds and a more modest sea, the water now gnawed at the land with renewed vigor. The very geology of Doggerland, much of it composed of relatively soft sediments deposited by glacial action, offered little resistance. It was like trying to build a sandcastle against a fire hose, a valiant effort, but ultimately futile. New bays and inlets began to carve themselves into the land, not through violent storms, but through the patient, persistent work of the rising water. Areas that were once dry land, perhaps marshy in places but fundamentally terrestrial, became vast, shallow lagoons, teeming with new forms of aquatic life. The landscape was literally becoming more porous, more watery, less solid. You could almost hear the land sighing, a long, drawn-out exhalation as it slowly sank beneath the waves. It was a geological slow-motion surrender, not a dramatic battle, which somehow makes it even more poignant. One mainstream historical fact to consider here is the sheer scale of the eustatic sea level rise during this period. We're talking about a global average increase of tens of meters, not just a few centimeters. This wasn't a local phenomenon, it was a planetary rebalancing act, and Doggerland was right in the crosshairs. The sheer volume of meltwater pouring into the oceans caused a global rise that fundamentally reshaped every coastline on Earth, not just Doggerland's. But here, in the relatively shallow North Sea basin, the impact was particularly pronounced, like a small, flat plate in a rapidly filling sink. The quirky tidbit here relates to the incredible, almost unimaginable, lengths of these ancient rivers. Some estimates suggest that the main, Dogger River, the combined outflow of the Thames, Rhine, Meuse, and Scheldt rivers, could have been one of the largest river systems in Europe during the Ice Age, stretching for hundreds of miles across the land bridge. Imagine that. A river so vast, so powerful, that it dwarfs many of the mighty rivers we know today. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That such a colossal natural feature could simply vanish. It's like finding out that the Grand Canyon used to be a bubbling hot tub for dinosaurs, and then one day it just decided to become a canyon. The scale of geological change is truly mind-boggling. As the water relentlessly crept inland, higher elevations, once mere hills within a continuous landscape, began to transform into islands. One day you'd walk from your camp to a hunting ground, and the next you'd find a new stretch of water separating you from it. These nascent islands, once part of the mainland, became isolated refuges for terrestrial animals and, for a time, for human communities. You'd see the deer, once free to roam, now confined to shrinking patches of dry land, their eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and a primal sense of being trapped. It's like watching a game of musical chairs where the chairs are land masses and the music is the relentless lapping of the rising tide. Spoiler alert, the land masses don't always win. The erosion wasn't just happening at the new coastlines. The newly formed channels and expanded river mouths experienced increased tidal scour. The power of the incoming and outgoing tides, now pushing against a wider, softer landscape, began to carve out deeper channels and reshape the submerged topography. The very seabed, which was once firm ground, started to churn and shift, slowly erasing the last terrestrial memories of the land above. Historians still argue whether the pace of this transformation was perceived as gradual or relatively sudden by the Mesolithic inhabitants. Was it a change that happened within a single lifetime, or did it unfold over generations, allowing for adaptation? While the overall process spanned millennia, there would have been periods of accelerated change, perhaps after particularly warm summers or during specific glacial melt pulses, that would have made the transformation feel far more immediate and dramatic. Imagine waking up one morning to find the familiar landscape of your childhood now dotted with new, unexpected bodies of water. It would be disorienting, to say the least. It's the ultimate, new normal, that nobody asked for, and certainly didn't vote on. The transformation of Doggerland's rivers and coastlines was not merely a geographical shift, it was an ecological revolution. Freshwater ecosystems were replaced by brackish and saltwater environments. Species adapted, migrated, or perished. The very fabric of life in Doggerland was being rewoven, thread by watery thread, into something fundamentally different. The land was becoming a seascape, and the inhabitants, both human and animal, had to learn to navigate this brave new, very wet world. The gentle whisper of waters, once a distant lullaby, now grows into a constant, pervasive hum. You stand on what was once a boundless plain, stretching out to the horizon, a verdant tapestry of forests and grasslands. But look closely now. The edges are blurring. The very land beneath your feet, this vast, continuous expanse that has been home for generations, begins to surrender to the relentless, creeping embrace of the sea. Imagine the perspective of someone living through this. It's not a sudden, dramatic flood, like a burst dam or a Hollywood movie scene. Oh no, this is far more insidious, far more patient. It's like watching a giant, invisible hand slowly, painstakingly, raising the water level in an enormous bathtub. Each day, each season, the shore creeps just a little further inland. A familiar path to the river now ends in a shallow, brackish pool. A favorite berry patch, once dry and accessible, becomes a marshy bog, then a small pond, then a part of an ever-expanding lake. You might wake up one morning, stretch, yawn, and glance out across the familiar landscape, only to notice something different. That clump of trees on the horizon? It seems a little smaller, a little more distant, surrounded by a shimmering expanse that wasn't quite so wide yesterday. A small stream you used to hop across now requires a careful wade. The ground underfoot, once firm and reliable, feels softer, squishier, like a half-forgotten sponge left out in the rain. This is the subtle, almost imperceptible march of Doggerland's fragmentation. The land, once a solid, unbroken canvas, starts to fray at the edges. Low-lying areas, the natural depressions and valleys, are the first to be swallowed. These become vast, shallow lagoons, then interconnected lakes, their waters slowly rising and merging, turning what were once dry pathways into watery channels. You might find yourself needing to navigate by boat where you once walked, paddling over the tops of submerged shrubs, a bizarre, inverted world reflecting the sky above the drowned landscape. It's a bit like trying to find your car in a parking lot that's slowly turning into a giant, muddy puddle, endlessly frustrating, and you definitely need better footwear. As the waters continue their inexorable rise, the higher elevations, the ancient hills and ridges that once merely punctuated the landscape, begin to stand out. They become peninsulas, stretching out into the expanding water, their connection to the mainland narrowing, becoming tenuous. And then, one day, perhaps after a particularly high tide, or a period of accelerated meltwater flow, that last sliver of land connecting them vanishes. Poof! Just like that, an island is born. You see it happen all around you. What was once a continuous landmass, a single, sprawling country, begins to break apart, like a giant jigsaw puzzle dissolving in water. Large sections become isolated, surrounded by the burgeoning sea. These are the Doggerland Islands, born not of volcanic fire, but of the slow, relentless erosion of an ancient world. Imagine the psychological impact. Your world, once limitless, is literally shrinking before your eyes. The horizons are closing in. One mainstream historical fact about this period is the sheer scale of the land lost. Over millennia, as the ice sheets retreated, the global sea level rose by well over 100 meters. For Doggerland, a relatively flat expanse, even a small rise in sea level meant a massive loss of land area. Entire regions that were once prime hunting grounds or fertile valleys were systematically submerged. The Doggerbank, that rich fishing ground in the North Sea today, is actually one of the last, highest remnants of this ancient landscape, a ghostly echo of a vast, lost world, now lying beneath the waves. It's like finding the very top of a skyscraper sticking out of the ocean, a testament to what lies beneath. This gradual transformation creates a landscape of dynamic, ever-changing coastlines. Every storm, every high tide, redefines the boundaries. You might build a shelter near a reliable freshwater spring, only to find it inundated a few years later, the spring now bubbling up from beneath the waves. It's a constant recalibration, a never-ending game of environmental whack-a-mole, except the moles are land masses disappearing and reappearing, briefly, in new forms. The emerging islands aren't just patches of dry land, they become unique ecosystems. As land bridges vanish, populations of animals can become isolated. Imagine a herd of wild horses or a family of deer, accustomed to roaming freely, suddenly finding themselves confined to a shrinking island. This can lead to fascinating, albeit temporary, evolutionary pressures. For example, a quirky or fringe tidbit from other isolated island populations is the phenomenon of island dwarfism, where large animals, due to limited resources, can evolve to be much smaller over generations. While we don't have direct evidence of Doggerland's animals shrinking to miniature versions of themselves, no tiny Mesolithic mammoths, sadly, the potential for such unique adaptations was certainly there on these nascent islands. It's like your pet goldfish suddenly realizing its bowl isn't getting any bigger. The air itself changes. The smell of salt becomes more prevalent, carried on the wind from the ever-closer sea. The sound of waves, once a distant murmur, becomes a constant presence, a rhythmic pulse against the new shorelines. And the light. The reflective surface of the water expands, throwing back the sunlight, making the world seem brighter, more open, yet paradoxically, more confined. You might notice the sun setting over water where it used to set over a distant forest, a subtle shift that speaks volumes about the grand transformation unfolding. For the people of Doggerland, this wasn't just a geographical change, it was a profound shift in their entire way of life. Their familiar world was literally being eaten away, piece by piece. Hunting grounds became smaller, fragmented. Travel routes that once spanned dry land now required boats, or long, circuitous detours around new stretches of water. Imagine trying to deliver a pizza across that kind of landscape. Sorry, your pepperoni special is delayed due to unexpected archipelago formation. It would be a logistical nightmare. Historians still argue whether the inhabitants of Doggerland perceived this as a series of distinct, alarming events, or a gradual, almost generational creep that simply became the new normal. Was there a moment of collective realization? Oh wow, we're on an island now! Epiphany? Or was it more like watching your garden slowly get overgrown, a continuous process where the exact moment of overgrown is hard to pinpoint? It's a fascinating question, trying to understand the human experience of such immense, slow-motion geological change. These newly formed islands, some large, some no more than rocky outcrops, would have offered temporary refuges. They would have been places where communities could regroup, where resources might still be found, even as the waters rose around them. But the writing was on the wall, or rather, on the waterline. Each new island was a testament to a loss, a marker of another piece of Doggerland swallowed by the hungry sea. The very concept of land was changing, becoming fractured, discontinuous. You watch as the last connections thin, as the water swirls around the bases of what were once hills, now becoming lonely sentinels in a vast, expanding seascape. The land bridge, that ancient umbilical cord connecting Britain to the continent, is not just thinning, it's fraying into countless threads, each one snapping under the pressure of the rising tide. The once mighty rivers, which had sculpted Doggerland's interior, now emptied directly into the ever-expanding North Sea, their estuaries becoming wide, brackish bays, constantly reshaped by the encroaching ocean. The air itself seems heavier with the scent of salt and damp earth. The soundscape is dominated by the gentle lapping of waves, punctuated by the cries of seabirds, now finding new nesting sites on these emerging islands. It's a melancholic beauty, this transformation. A world dying, yet giving birth to new, albeit temporary, forms. The land, once so solid and dependable, reveals its ephemeral nature, proving itself to be just as fluid and changeable as the waters that now claim it. And so, the land bridge, once a highway for migrating animals and people, slowly, inexorably, becomes an archipelago, a scattered necklace of diminishing islands, awaiting their final, watery fate. You're standing on what feels like solid ground, a familiar patch of marshy grassland, the kind you've known your whole life. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant pines. You've hunted these valleys, fished these rivers, known every twist of the land. But lately, something feels off. It's not a sudden, dramatic flood, no, nothing so convenient for a quick exit. Instead, it's a whisper, a sigh, a slow, relentless tightening of the world around you. This isn't the Doggerland your grandparents described, and it certainly isn't the Doggerland you remember from your own childhood. Imagine waking up one morning and finding the small, meandering stream you always jumped across is now a wider, deeper channel, forcing you to find a fallen log or a shallower ford. Then, a few seasons later, that ford is gone, swallowed by an ever-expanding ribbon of water. The salty tang of the sea, once a distant novelty carried on the prevailing winds, now hangs heavier in the air, a constant reminder of the encroaching blue. You see it in the way the freshwater reeds along the riverbanks begin to struggle, replaced by hardier, salt-tolerant grasses. You notice it when a favorite hunting path, once firm underfoot, becomes a squelching bog, then an impassable stretch of shallow water. It's like your world is slowly, imperceptibly, being dissolved from the edges inwards, a sugar cube in a very, very large cup of tea. And you, my friend, are the sugar cube. The changes aren't just aesthetic, they're existential. Your traditional hunting grounds, those vast, open plains where herds of wild horses and mighty aurochs once roamed, are shrinking. The forests, once sprawling canopies providing shelter and timber, are becoming waterlogged, their roots drowning, their branches brittle with the stress of constant saturation. Animals, far more sensitive to environmental shifts than even the most attuned human, begin to migrate, seeking higher ground, new pastures. You see fewer deer, fewer boar, their tracks leading relentlessly east or south, away from the encroaching waters. It's like your favorite supermarket suddenly decided to stop stocking half of its shelves, and the remaining items are moving further and further away. You'd probably consider a new shopping strategy, wouldn't you? For the Mesolithic communities of Doggerland, this wasn't a matter of convenience, it was survival. They were not farmers tied to specific plots of land, but hunter-gatherers, inherently mobile and adaptable. Yet, even for them, this scale of environmental transformation presented unprecedented challenges. Their entire way of life, built on deep generational knowledge of the land's rhythms and resources, was being rewritten by the rising tides. You have to imagine the elders, their faces etched with the wisdom of countless seasons, pointing to landmarks that are now half submerged, telling tales of valleys that are now wide, open bays. Back in my day, they'd start. This was all solid ground, Sonny. You could walk for days and never see a ripple. The young ones would just nod, having known nothing but a world constantly in flux. The most immediate and profound adaptation was simply movement. As the lowlands became inundated, communities were forced to abandon ancient campsites, sacred burial grounds, and well-worn trails. You pack up your essentials, your tools, your hides, your fire-starting kit, and you move. You follow the retreating wildlife, or you seek out the highest ground, the last remaining hills that poke like islands from the expanding sea. This wasn't a leisurely stroll, it was a constant, often urgent, repositioning. Every few years, perhaps even every few seasons, you're looking for a new place to call home, a new source of fresh water, a new patch of land that hasn't yet been claimed by the relentless ocean. It's like a never-ending game of musical chairs, but the chairs are disappearing, and the music never stops. This forced migration led to a fundamental shift in their diet, and consequently, their tools and techniques. As terrestrial game became scarcer and more concentrated on diminishing land masses, the bounty of the sea and the new, expanded freshwater environments became increasingly vital. You find yourself spending less time tracking deer through forests, and more time by the water's edge. Fish, shellfish, and waterfowl, once supplementary sources of protein, became staples. This is a mainstream historical fact about Mesolithic Europe. As the Ice Age ended and sea levels rose, many hunter-gatherer groups across the continent, not just in Doggerland, transitioned from predominantly land-based hunting to a more diversified diet that heavily included aquatic resources. They became, in essence, the world's first seafood connoisseurs, though perhaps without the fancy lemon wedges and cocktail sauce. This dietary shift wasn't just about what they ate, it was about how they lived. You learned to fish with nets woven from plant fibers, or perhaps with intricate fish traps set in the newly formed estuaries. You craft harpoons with barbed points for spearing larger fish or seals. You learned to identify edible shellfish by the tide, and you develop new ways to process and preserve your aquatic harvest. The very landscape, once defined by its forests and plains, now presented a mosaic of new opportunities, vast, shallow lagoons teeming with fish, new coastal zones rich in shellfish, and an abundance of migratory birds. You discover that the very water that took your land also brought new life, new challenges, and new forms of sustenance. It's a bittersweet exchange, isn't it? The need for mobility on an increasingly watery landscape also spurred innovation in transportation. While direct archaeological evidence is scarce due to the submerged nature of Doggerland, it's highly probable that these communities developed and refined watercraft. You might have seen the first rudimentary dugout canoes, painstakingly carved from single tree trunks, or perhaps rafts constructed from bundles of reeds. These would have been essential for navigating the expanding network of waterways, for reaching new fishing grounds, and for maintaining contact with other scattered groups. Imagine a world where your daily commute involves paddling across what used to be your neighbor's backyard. Talk about a property value dip. As their world fragmented into smaller islands and peninsulas, the social dynamics of these communities would have been profoundly affected. Historians still argue whether this increased resource scarcity and reduced available land led to greater conflict between groups, or if it fostered a stronger sense of cooperation and shared knowledge in the face of a common, overwhelming environmental threat. Did they fight over the last patches of good hunting ground, or did they pool their resources and knowledge to survive together? Perhaps it was a bit of both, depending on the group and the specific pressures they faced. It's a question that echoes into our own times, isn't it? When the chips are down, do we draw lines, or do we build bridges? A quirky tidbit that hints at this adaptation comes from the occasional discovery of fishing weirs, ancient structures built in shallow waters to trap fish, found off the coasts of what is now the UK and continental Europe. These submerged remnants, sometimes only visible during extreme low tides or through sonar, offer tantalizing glimpses into the ingenuity of these Mesolithic people. They weren't just reacting, they were actively shaping their environment, building infrastructure to exploit the new aquatic bounty. Imagine building something so fundamental to your survival, only for the sea to slowly, patiently, claim it over centuries. It's like building a sandcastle, only the tide is moving in geological slow motion. For generations, the people of Doggerland lived with this constant, creeping change. Children grew up knowing a world where the horizon was always shifting, where old stories of dry land were becoming increasingly mythical. They adapted their knowledge, their tools, their very way of life to this ever-shrinking stage. They learned to read the currents, to predict the tides, to understand the new patterns of marine life. They were, in essence, the ultimate survivors, perpetually adjusting to a world that refused to stay still. Their human landscape, once vast and terrestrial, became increasingly defined by the water, by the channels and estuaries that carved up their ancestral home. They were becoming, whether they knew it or not, a people of the sea. The world around you, once a sprawling terrestrial canvas, has now become a fluid, shimmering mosaic. You've seen the land shrink, felt the ground beneath your feet recede, and now, you must become a creature of the water yourself. This isn't just about moving to higher ground, it's about fundamentally reshaping your entire existence, from the tools you clutch to the food that fills your belly, to the very pathways you traverse. Doggerland isn't just disappearing, it's demanding a new kind of human, one who understands the language of tides and currents. Imagine yourself standing on what was once a vast, open plain, now an ever-narrowing strip of marshy ground. The familiar scent of pine forests is slowly giving way to the briny tang of salt and damp earth. Your ancestors might have been master hunters of the steppe, but you, dear listener, are becoming a master of the littoral zone, that fascinating, squelchy borderland where land meets sea. This wasn't a sudden flip of a switch, mind you. It was a slow, generational pivot, a grand, messy experiment in human ingenuity. Let's talk tools first, because they are, after all, extensions of our will. The mighty hunting spear, once honed for the lumbering deer of the plains, now feels a bit clunky. Instead, you see the rapid evolution of specialized aquatic implements. Think about the harpoon, not just a sharpened stick, but a beautifully crafted piece of art and engineering. You learn to select the perfect piece of antler, perhaps from a red deer that still roams the shrinking woodlands, or a sturdy bone from a whale carcass washed ashore. You painstakingly carve its barbs, ensuring they will hold fast in the slippery flesh of a leaping salmon or a powerful sturgeon. The tip might be detachable, tethered to a long line of twisted plant fibers, allowing you to retrieve your catch without losing the precious harpoon itself. It's a bit like an ancient, organic fishing reel, only you're the one doing all the reeling. And it's not just harpoons. You start to see an abundance of bone and antler points, some finely serrated, designed for spearing eels wriggling through muddy shallows. Nets, once perhaps rudimentary traps for small game, now become sophisticated creations. You spend countless hours, hands calloused, weaving fibers from nettles, flax, or willow bark into intricate meshes. These nets are then weighted with smooth, drilled stones, and perhaps buoyed by pieces of light wood or even inflated animal bladders. You learn where to set them, how the current will push the fish, how to hide them from the keen eyes of passing waterfowl. Setting up a series of these nets in an estuary as the tide recedes, then returning to find it teeming with silvery fish, must have felt like hitting the jackpot. A lot less effort than chasing a wild boar through dense undergrowth, if you ask me. Then there are the fish traps and weirs. These are the true architectural marvels of the Mesolithic aquatic world. Imagine constructing complex fences of interwoven branches and stakes across shallow river channels or tidal flats. These structures, often V-shaped or funnel-like, would guide fish into a contained area as the water levels dropped, leaving them stranded and easy to harvest. It required communal effort, a deep understanding of water flow, and a surprising amount of engineering know-how. It's like building your own drive-through restaurant for fish, only you're the one doing the driving and the eating. But how do you get to these fish, these traps, these ever-shifting islands? You need boats, of course. This is where the true revolution in travel takes place. The dugout canoe becomes your new chariot. Imagine the backbreaking labor involved, felling a massive tree, a sturdy oak or a resilient pine, then painstakingly hollowing it out with stone adzes and controlled burning. You chip away, then char the wood, then scrape the charcoal, repeating the process until a stable, buoyant vessel emerged. These weren't sleek racing shells. They were workhorses, designed for stability in choppy waters, capable of carrying multiple people, nets, tools, and a good day's catch. Some were surprisingly large, able to navigate coastal waters and even cross open stretches of sea. Alongside the dugouts, you likely see lighter, more agile vessels, hide boats, akin to ancient coracles or curraghs. Picture a framework of bent willow or hazel branches, covered tautly with animal hides, perhaps deer or sealskin, stitched together with sinew and made waterproof with animal fat or pine resin. These were faster, easier to portage over land, and perfect for navigating shallow, reedy waterways or for solo hunting trips. Historians still argue whether the increasing reliance on boats led to more widespread trade networks or isolated communities further as water barriers grew. It's a chicken and egg situation with a lot of splinters. With these new tools and vessels comes a dramatic shift in diet. The emphasis moves from the large terrestrial game that once roamed the Doggerland plains to the bountiful harvest of the waters. Your meals now feature a staggering variety of fish: salmon migrating upstream, plump cod from deeper waters, slithery eels from the mudflats, and flatfish camouflaged on the sandy bottom. Shellfish become a dietary staple: oysters, mussels, cockles, periwinkles, easy to gather from exposed mudflats at low tide. Imagine the sheer abundance, the protein-rich feast just waiting to be plucked from the shore. It was the ancient equivalent of an all-you-can-eat seafood buffet, only you had to shuck your own oysters. Waterfowl, too, become an increasingly important food source. Ducks, geese, swans, not just for their meat, but for their eggs, a vital source of protein and fat during the nesting season. You learn to recognize their calls, their flight patterns, and where they nest in the reedy marshes. Even aquatic plants contribute to the larder: the roots of water lilies, the tender shoots of reeds, or the tubers of water chestnuts. Your diet becomes incredibly rich in omega-3 fatty acids, likely making you quite healthy, though perhaps a bit smelly from all the fish. This dietary shift isn't just about what you eat, it's about how you preserve it. With massive hauls of fish, you can't eat it all at once. So, you learn the art of smoking, drying, and salting. Imagine rows upon rows of fish, strung up on wooden racks, slowly curing in the sun and wind, or over smoldering fires. This allows for food storage, crucial for the lean winter months or for when the fishing isn't so good. It's the Mesolithic version of a well-stocked pantry, only your pantry smells faintly of smoked salmon and damp earth. Travel, as we touched on with boats, transforms completely. The landscape of Doggerland becomes a labyrinth of channels, estuaries, and emerging islands. What was once a long walk across a valley is now a journey requiring navigation skills honed over generations. You learn to read the currents, anticipate the tides, understand the nuances of the wind on the water. You know which channels are safe, which are treacherous, and where the sandbars lurk just beneath the surface. You develop a mental map not just of solid ground, but of shifting water. Communication and connection between communities also adapt. As land bridges fragment, boats become the lifelines. You use them to visit neighboring groups, to trade resources, perhaps flint from a distant quarry for a particularly good piece of amber found on a new shoreline. These journeys foster a sense of shared identity, but also unique adaptations within isolated pockets. Some communities might become expert seal hunters, others master fowlers, each specializing in the aquatic bounty of their immediate surroundings. There's even some intriguing, albeit quirky, archaeological evidence suggesting that Mesolithic people might have trained dogs not just for hunting on land, but also for retrieving waterfowl from the water, or even for locating fish in shallow streams. Imagine a furry, four-legged fishing buddy. The very rhythm of life shifts. Your days are now dictated by the ebb and flow of the tides, the seasonal runs of fish, the nesting cycles of birds. You become intimately connected to the aquatic world, your senses finely tuned to its subtle changes. The splash of a jumping fish, the cry of a distant seabird, the feel of the current against your paddle, these become the everyday sounds and sensations of your shrinking, yet surprisingly abundant, world. You've been watching the waters creep in, a slow, relentless tide that felt less like an invasion and more like a very patient, very wet houseguest. You've adapted, you've moved, you've learned to cast your nets a little wider and your hopes a little higher. Doggerland, your world, is shrinking, yes, but it's doing so with a certain stately, if mournful, grace. The sea has been whispering its intentions for centuries, growing bolder with each passing year, gently nudging you towards higher ground. You'd almost grown accustomed to its slow, watery embrace. Almost. But then, the whispers stop. Suddenly, the world holds its breath. Far, far to the north, off the coast of what we now call Norway, something truly monumental is stirring beneath the frigid waves. Imagine a landmass, not Doggerland itself, but a vast, submerged shelf of sediment and rock, accumulated over millennia, stretching for hundreds of kilometers along the continental slope. This colossal underwater edifice, unstable for reasons that scientists still meticulously study, perhaps a combination of seismic activity, the melting ice sheets dumping sediment, or even the sheer weight of the water itself, finally gives way. With a groan that would have rattled the very foundations of the earth, had anyone been close enough to hear it, a section of this immense shelf, larger than Scotland, shears off. It's not just a landslide, it's a mega landslide. We call it the Storegga slide, and it wasn't just big, it was one of the largest known landslides in Earth's history. Picture a chunk of land, truly enormous, suddenly plummeting down the continental slope, displacing an unimaginable volume of water. It's like dropping an entire mountain range into a bathtub, only the bathtub is the North Sea. And you're in it. The immediate effect is a colossal, silent void. As the seabed collapses, the water above it is sucked down, creating a momentary, terrifying recession of the shoreline. If you were standing on the coast of Doggerland at that precise moment, perhaps gathering shellfish or simply gazing out at the familiar expanse of water, you would have seen something utterly unprecedented. The sea, which for generations had been inching inland, would suddenly, dramatically, pull back. It would recede beyond the lowest low tide marks you'd ever witnessed, exposing vast stretches of seabed that had never seen the light of day. Fish would flop in the newly exposed mud, stranded and gasping. Boats would be left high and dry, listing awkwardly on what was moments before the open sea. It would be a sight of profound, unsettling strangeness, an impossible reversal of everything you knew. You might even, for a fleeting moment, feel a sense of relief, thinking the sea had finally decided to pack up its bags and leave. Oh good, you might think. It's finally going back where it came from. Though it's a bit dramatic, isn't it? A bit much, even for the ocean. But this brief respite, this eerie calm, is merely the wind-up before the pitch. That immense volume of displaced water, now free, begins to rush outwards in all directions, forming a series of truly monstrous waves. These aren't your typical wind-blown choppies. These are tsunamis, powerful, fast-moving walls of water that travel across the ocean at jet-plane speeds, barely noticeable in the deep ocean, but building to cataclysmic heights as they approach shallow coasts. For Doggerland, already a low-lying, fragmented landscape, the arrival of the Storegga tsunami would have been nothing short of apocalyptic. The main wave, estimated to be anywhere from 10 to 20 meters high as it slammed into the British Isles, would have been an unimaginable force. If you were on the western edge of Doggerland, you might have seen it first, not a breaking wave like those you know, but a rapidly approaching, dark line on the horizon, swelling with terrifying speed into an insurmountable, churning wall of water. There would be no escape, no time to gather your family, your tools, your hopes. No ancient weather app or Mesolithic meteorologist could have predicted this. Warning: incoming watery apocalypse. Grab your spears and run. But where would you run? The impact would have been devastating. The sheer energy of that water, traveling at hundreds of kilometers per hour, would have scoured the land, ripping up trees, eroding soil, and pulverizing anything in its path. Imagine the roar, a sound unlike any you've ever heard, a thunderous, all-consuming bellow of water, wood, and rock. It wouldn't just submerge your home, it would obliterate it. The wave would surge inland, not just as a flood, but as a destructive, liquid bulldozer, sweeping away settlements, hunting camps, and entire forests. For the hunter-gatherer communities scattered across Doggerland, this was a sudden, incomprehensible disaster. They were people intimately connected to their land, reading every subtle sign, every shift in the wind or tide. They understood the slow, gradual rise of the sea. They adapted to it. But this was an act of nature on a scale that defied all experience, all understanding. Those living on the lower, flatter plains of Doggerland would have been completely overwhelmed, their lives extinguished in an instant. Those on higher ground, the remnants of ancient hills or plateaus that had become islands, might have survived the initial wave, but they would have been left on a landscape irrevocably altered, scoured clean of resources, and surrounded by a vast, new, turbulent sea. Historians still argue whether the Storegga tsunami was the sole cause of Doggerland's final submergence, or if it merely accelerated an already inevitable process. It's true that the sea was already rising, but the tsunami delivered a sudden, violent blow that fundamentally changed the game. It wasn't just a deeper flood, it was a cataclysmic resculpting of the landscape. The powerful currents and sheer volume of water would have eroded coastlines, fragmented existing land masses, and likely swept away vast amounts of sediment and topsoil. It would have turned fertile hunting grounds into barren, waterlogged plains, or simply absorbed them entirely into the churning North Sea. Think of the psychological impact. For generations, your people had seen their world shrink, but always with a sense of continuity. Now, in a single, terrifying event, that continuity was shattered. The very ground beneath your feet had betrayed you. The sea, once a provider and a slow encroacher, had become a monstrous, annihilating force. Even if you survived, your world would be unrecognizable. Your landmarks gone, your familiar hunting trails erased, your neighbors vanished. You would be left adrift, literally and figuratively, in a world that had changed more in a single hour than it had in the previous 1,000 years. The Storegga tsunami was not the first time the sea had risen, nor the last. But it was the singular, devastating exclamation point at the end of Doggerland's long, slow disappearance. It was the moment when the whispers turned into a roar, a final, destructive blow that ensured that Doggerland, the vast, fertile heartland of Mesolithic Europe, would pass from living memory into the realm of myth and geological history. Some theories even suggest that ancient human myths of great floods or deluges, found across various cultures, might have distant echoes of events like the Storegga tsunami, passed down through generations, transforming geological catastrophe into cautionary tales. It certainly gives new meaning to the phrase, "bad hair day," if your hair is now permanently wet and full of seaweed. What remained of Doggerland after this catastrophic event would have been a desolate, broken landscape. The land bridge, already tenuous, would have been irrevocably severed. The connection between Britain and mainland Europe, once a robust highway for people and animals, was now a deep, impassable chasm of water. The final act of separation was not a gentle fading away, but a violent, watery severing, leaving behind a new, isolated island in the north. You stand, or perhaps you float now, a silent observer in this grand, watery theater, as Doggerland, the ancient heartland, takes its final, agonizing bow. The Storegga tsunami, that monstrous wave from the deep, had delivered a gut punch, yes, a sudden, brutal acceleration of Doggerland's demise. But the true, poignant end wasn't a singular, crashing crescendo. Oh no, it was far more insidious, a drawn-out, whispering fade, like a forgotten song slowly losing its melody to the relentless, watery hum of the encroaching North Sea. Imagine yourself perched on what feels like the very last, lonely hillock, a solitary pimple of resistance against an ocean that seems to have developed an insatiable appetite. You're not just watching the water rise, you're living it, feeling the very ground beneath your feet shrinking with each passing tide. It's not a dramatic waterfall or a sudden collapse. Think of it more like a bathtub filling, but instead of the water rising, the tub itself is slowly dissolving. You look around, and the world is just less. Less land, more water. It's a subtle, almost polite invasion, if an invasion can ever be described as such. The air here is thick with a damp chill, carrying the scent of salt and decaying vegetation. The wind, once rustling through vast forests, now whistles mournfully across wide, open expanses of water. You can practically taste the brine on your lips, even if you're just a phantom presence witnessing this tragedy. The sky above is often a bruised gray, reflecting the mood of the landscape below, though sometimes a sliver of pale sunlight breaks through, only to illuminate the endless, shimmering expanse that was once solid earth. It's a bit like watching a very slow-motion horror movie, where the monster isn't a creature, but the very environment itself, and you're just waiting for the final, inevitable fade to black. You might even find yourself unconsciously holding your breath, as if that could somehow slow the creeping tide. The land that remains is a patchwork quilt of greens and browns, rapidly turning to murky blues and grays. What were once rolling hills are now mere humps, islands in an ever-expanding archipelago. The ancient rivers, once Doggerland's lifeblood, have long since merged with the sea, their identities swallowed whole. Now the water isn't just rising, it's spreading, finding every low-lying depression, every valley, every forgotten hollow, filling them with a quiet, determined gurgle. You can almost hear the earth sighing as it gives way. You observe the last remnants of life struggling to adapt, or simply to survive. The sturdy oak trees, ancient sentinels that have stood for centuries, are now half submerged, their lower branches tangled with seaweed, their leaves yellowing from the saltwater intrusion. They look like old men, their feet in cold water, waiting for the inevitable. Birds, once nesting in their high branches, circle frantically overhead, their calls sharp with confusion. Where do they go now? Their ancient migratory paths, their familiar landmarks, are dissolving before their very eyes. It's a harsh reminder that nature, while resilient, has its limits, and a slow, relentless flood is one of them. You might even spot a particularly stubborn badger, still trying to dig a set on a patch of ground that will be underwater by morning. "Buddy," you might whisper, "it's time to pack your bags. Or, learn to hold your breath for a very long time." The water creeps higher. It laps at the base of the highest dunes, then begins to nibble at their slopes. The soft sand, once firm underfoot, now sloshes and gives way, a watery quicksand pulling at the last vestiges of solid ground. You see patches of marsh grass, once vibrant green, now submerged and rotting, sending up a faint, acrid smell that mixes with the sea air. This isn't a sudden deluge, it's a patient, methodical drowning. Each high tide pushes the boundary further inland, and each low tide reveals less than before. It's like watching your favorite sandcastle slowly get eroded by the waves, but on a geological scale, and with real consequences for actual living things. Think about the time scales here. While the Storegga event was relatively quick, the final, complete submergence of the entire Doggerland landmass was a process spanning centuries after the initial major meltwater pulses. By around 6500 BC, much of what we now call Doggerland was already submerged, but pockets of higher ground, particularly the area around the Dogger Bank itself, persisted as islands for a significant period longer. This is a mainstream historical fact, illustrating that even after major events, the final act can be a drawn-out epilogue. This relentless, gradual rise of the sea level, often measured in mere millimeters per year, was cumulatively devastating. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? An entire civilization's landscape eroding at a pace too slow to notice daily, but too fast to ignore over a lifetime. It's like watching paint dry, but the paint is your entire world, and it's slowly turning blue. As the millennia rolled on, the once connected world became an archipelago of dwindling islands, each one a shrinking refuge. You imagine the Mesolithic communities, those hardy hunter-gatherers, having long since abandoned these last, watery outposts. They would have moved, adapted, their canoes becoming their primary mode of transport, their diets shifting to embrace the bounty of the sea. But for the land itself, there was no adaptation, only surrender. The last terrestrial creatures, perhaps a few desperate deer or a solitary wild boar, would have been forced to swim for distant, unknown shores, or simply succumb to the cold embrace of the burgeoning North Sea. It's a poignant thought, isn't it? The final, unrecorded exodus of the last land-dwelling mammals from a land that was no more. One quirky tidbit, often overlooked in the grand narrative of Doggerland, concerns the freshwater springs. Even as the sea encroached, some deep-seated freshwater springs, fed by ancient aquifers, might have continued to bubble up through the newly formed seabed for a time, creating isolated pockets of brackish water amidst the salt water. Imagine a fish, swimming along, minding its own business, and suddenly it hits a pocket of fresh water. It'd be like walking into a room and suddenly realizing you're in a giant swimming pool filled with sparkling water, not the salty ocean you were expecting. These were transient phenomena, of course, eventually overwhelmed, but they represent a final, desperate gasp of the land's original hydrological system. It's a tiny, almost imperceptible detail in the vastness of the ocean, but it speaks volumes about the slow, complex death of a landscape. Now, picture the very last moments. You're standing on that highest point, a small, rocky outcrop, perhaps a former hillock that used to be surrounded by dry land. The water is now lapping at your ankles, then your knees. The wind whips around you, no longer carrying the scent of pine or damp earth, but only the raw, untamed smell of the ocean. The horizon is no longer defined by distant trees or hills, but by the seamless, unbroken line where the gray sky meets the gray sea. There's a profound silence now, broken only by the gentle slosh of the waves against the last remaining rock. The birds have gone. The animals have gone. Even the wind seems to have hushed, as if in reverence for the passing of a world. Scholars still debate the exact sequence of events for the final inundation of every last terrestrial pocket of Doggerland. Was it a series of small, rapid pulses of meltwater from the retreating ice sheets, or a more uniform, relentless rise? Was there a final, definitive, last island that succumbed, or did countless tiny remnants just wink out of existence simultaneously? The truth is, it was likely a complex interplay of both, with local topography dictating which parts held on longest. But regardless of the precise mechanism, the outcome was the same: land became sea. The water swirls around your waist now, then your chest. The last patch of earth beneath your feet is no larger than a dinner table. You might try to cling to a solitary, gnarled bush, its roots still gripping the shrinking soil, but even it is beginning to tremble. The feeling isn't one of panic, but of a profound, almost spiritual resignation. There's no fighting this. There's no escape. The world simply transforms. And then, with one final, almost imperceptible surge, the water washes over your feet, then your ankles, and the last, tiny bit of Doggerland, that ancient, vibrant land bridge, vanishes beneath the waves. It's not a splash, not a roar. It's a gentle, almost regretful gurgle as the last air bubbles escape from the soil. The surface of the water ripples, then smooths over, reflecting the vast, empty sky. Where there was once solid ground, now there is only the undulating surface of the North Sea. The transition is complete. Doggerland is no more. It has become one with the ocean, a silent, submerged continent, its secrets now guarded by the cold, dark depths. The sea doesn't gloat, it just is. And Doggerland simply isn't, not as land anyway. It's a rather dramatic way to go, if you asked me. No grand farewell party, no emotional speeches, just a quiet, watery embrace. And just like that, the curtain falls on a world that once was, leaving only the endless, rolling waves in its place. The last, lingering tendrils of Doggerland, those stubbornly elevated patches that fought the inevitable for millennia, finally give way. You stand on the precipice, perhaps a high cliff overlooking what was once a valley, now a churning expanse of water. The final geological gasp, the last defiant whisper of land, is consumed by the relentless rise. You feel the tremor, not of an earthquake, but of a world irrevocably changing. The ancient land bridge, the umbilical cord connecting what would become Britain to the vast European continent, snaps. With a final, sorrowful sigh, the waters surge, filling the last remaining gaps, carving out the deep, definitive channels. Imagine the sound, not a sudden, dramatic crash, but the ceaseless, hungry lapping of waves against fresh earth, eroding, consuming, reshaping. The North Sea, already swollen and immense, now stretches its watery fingers further west, merging with the nascent English Channel. That narrow, often tempestuous strait, the Dover Strait, becomes the final, impassable barrier. It's thought that this crucial breach, perhaps carved out by catastrophic floods from glacial lakes long before the final Doggerland submergence, was continually widened and deepened by the rising seas and strong currents, completing the island's encirclement. You can almost hear the water gurgling, like a giant bathtub slowly overflowing, until plink, the last bubble of land disappears. No more soggy walks to France for you, my friend. This isn't just a geographical shift, it's a profound ecological and cultural sundering. Geologically, Britain is now an island, distinct and separate. The landmass, once part of a sprawling continental shelf, is now defined by its watery borders. The currents of the North Sea and the Channel begin to establish their modern patterns, influencing everything from sediment deposition to marine life. The climate, too, subtly shifts. The buffering effect of the land bridge is gone, allowing the full force of Atlantic weather systems to buffet the new island. You might notice the air feels a little crisper, a little more maritime, carrying the tang of salt and distant storms. For the creatures of the land, this separation is a death knell for easy migration. Large land mammals, like the majestic mammoths and woolly rhinos that once roamed Doggerland, had already largely vanished or retreated north. But even smaller, more resilient species now find their paths cut off. You'll observe a gradual divergence in flora and fauna. British stoats, for instance, are now genetically distinct from their continental cousins. It's like a giant game of musical chairs, and when the music stopped, Britain was left with a slightly different set of players. This is why, even today, Britain has fewer native land mammal species than comparable areas on the European mainland. No wild boars naturally roaming the forests, no brown bears naturally slumbering in caves, not like on the continent. Of course, this also means no naturally occurring venomous snakes that can actually kill you, so silver linings, right? You can still worry about the adders, but at least you don't have to check your shoes for vipers before putting them on in the morning. The cultural implications of this definitive separation are immense, shaping the very identity of Britain for millennia to come. Imagine the Mesolithic communities still clinging to the edges of what was now England. Their world, which had been shrinking for centuries, now became an island. No longer could they simply follow the herds across vast plains to the continent. No longer could they easily trade ideas, tools, and genes with their kin across a land bridge. This wasn't an immediate, dramatic shift in human behavior, but a gradual, creeping realization that the world had fundamentally changed. You feel a subtle, almost unconscious, shift in perspective. Before, Britain was just the westernmost peninsula of Europe. Now, it's a world unto itself. This isolation, while initially a challenge, eventually becomes a defining characteristic. For one, defense becomes inherently easier. You don't need a massive land army guarding every border. The sea provides a natural moat. This geographical advantage would play a pivotal role in future history, allowing Britain, much later, to develop as a naval power, largely protected from the land invasions that plagued continental Europe. Think of it as nature's own security system, albeit one that occasionally lets in Vikings. But this insularity also means a slower, more deliberate pace of cultural diffusion. New technologies, new agricultural practices, new ideas, they now have to cross a watery barrier. While boats and rudimentary seafaring existed, they were no match for walking across dry land. For instance, the transition to farming, which began in the Near East and spread across Europe, arrived in Britain later than in neighboring continental regions. You can imagine early British farmers, perhaps a few centuries behind their French counterparts, scratching their heads and thinking, "Wait, you mean we don't have to hunt everything? This planting seeds thing sounds revolutionary." Historians still argue whether this delayed adoption of agriculture was solely due to geographical isolation, or if other social and environmental factors played an equally significant role. It's a bit like asking if your internet is slow because you live far from the router or because your neighbor is hogging all the bandwidth with their excessive streaming of cat videos. This separation fosters a unique sense of identity. Over time, the people living on this island would develop distinct customs, languages, and even genetic profiles. While there would be subsequent waves of migration, Neolithic farmers, Bronze Age metalworkers, Iron Age Celts, Romans, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, Normans, each wave would arrive by sea, and each would encounter an already distinct island culture, which they would then adapt and be adapted by. It's a bit like baking a cake. You add new ingredients, but the basic recipe, the island flour, remains foundational. Consider the linguistic implications. While early common roots would exist, the separation allowed for the distinct evolution of dialects and eventually languages. Imagine two groups of cousins, one on the island and one on the mainland, slowly drifting apart in their speech, until one day they meet again and can barely understand each other. "What's a lift?" asks the islander. "It's what you call an elevator, silly," replies the mainlander. It's a very slow, very ancient version of that. The island status also meant that certain cultural practices might have been preserved longer, or developed in unique ways, without the constant influence of overland interaction. You might find a quirky tidbit here, like the enduring British love for queuing, which some scholars jokingly link to the island's historical need for orderly boarding onto boats, or perhaps just a general British predilection for polite waiting. Or the fact that the British have a unique obsession with tea, which, while imported, became a core part of their identity in a way it didn't quite elsewhere. It's almost as if being cut off from the continent made them double down on their own peculiarities, like a teenager who dyes their hair purple just to prove a point to their parents. So, as Doggerland vanished beneath the waves, Britain didn't just become an island geographically, it began its journey to becoming an island in spirit. This definitive separation, forged in the retreating ice and rising seas of the Mesolithic, laid the groundwork for everything that followed: its unique history, its distinct culture, its relationship with the rest of Europe, and even its weather. You feel the cool sea breeze on your face, a constant reminder of the watery embrace that now defines this land. You've witnessed Doggerland's gradual retreat, felt the chill of the rising waters, and imagined the final, devastating roar of the Storegga tsunami. But now, as the last ripples settle over the submerged world, you might wonder, how do we know all this? How can we speak with such certainty about a land that vanished beneath the waves thousands of years ago? Well, my friend, the whispers of Doggerland didn't completely fade. Instead, they settled into the cold, dark embrace of the North Sea, leaving behind a profound and fascinating trail of breadcrumbs for us to follow. Imagine, if you will, the vast, churning expanse of the North Sea today. It's a busy place, isn't it? Full of fishing trawlers dragging their nets, oil and gas platforms standing like metallic giants, and colossal wind farms silently spinning their turbines. These aren't exactly archaeological expeditions, are they? Yet, it's precisely these industrial activities that have, over decades, inadvertently become our greatest allies in uncovering Doggerland's secrets. Think of it as Mother Nature's very own time capsule, only she didn't quite seal it properly, and now the contents are occasionally spilling out onto the deck of a fishing boat. For generations, North Sea fishermen have pulled up more than just cod and sole in their nets. They've hauled aboard strange, heavy objects, often dismissed as mere seabed detritus. But every now and then, something truly remarkable would emerge: a massive, curved tusk, the size of a man's arm, dripping with seawater, a giant molar, ridged and dark, clearly not from any modern animal, or perhaps a piece of gnarled, ancient wood, surprisingly heavy and waterlogged. These were the first tantalizing hints, the earliest whispers from the deep, confirming that something extraordinary lay beneath. These initial, accidental discoveries were overwhelmingly the remains of megafauna, the colossal creatures that roamed Doggerland's plains. You might picture a fisherman, wiping salt spray from his brow, staring down at a woolly mammoth tooth the size of his fist, or a perfectly preserved antler from an extinct giant deer, still sharp at the tines. It's like pulling up a lottery ticket, only instead of money, you get a piece of prehistory. These finds weren't just isolated curiosities. They were consistent, widespread, and pointed to a rich, ancient ecosystem, teeming with life now lost to the ages. We're talking bones from woolly rhinos, bison, wild horses, and even the occasional lion, a veritable prehistoric safari park, all found hundreds of kilometers offshore. But animal bones, while exciting, don't tell the whole story. What truly solidified the existence of Doggerland as a land bridge, a place of human habitation, were the archaeological artifacts. Imagine the metallic clink of a dredge net as it's hauled aboard, and amidst the gritty sand and shells, there, resting innocently, is a piece of flint. Not just any flint, mind you, but one clearly worked by human hands, a blade, a scraper, or perhaps even a delicate arrowhead. These unmistakable tools, often found alongside the ancient animal remains, were the undeniable proof that humans had not only visited this lost land, but had lived and thrived there, hunting those very same megafauna. One of the most profound pieces of evidence, a true mainstream historical fact confirming Doggerland's existence, comes from the extensive discovery of submerged peat layers and ancient river channels. Picture this: divers exploring the seabed, not just finding scattered artifacts, but encountering vast, dark swathes of what looks like compressed, decaying vegetation. This is ancient peat, formed from the decomposition of plants in the absence of oxygen, just as it forms in bogs on dry land. When these peat samples are brought to the surface and subjected to carbon-14 dating, they consistently show dates corresponding to the Mesolithic period, precisely when Doggerland was above water. Furthermore, sophisticated sonar mapping, often employed by oil and gas companies for geological surveys, has revealed the unmistakable contours of vast, meandering river valleys and ancient shorelines etched into the seabed, mirroring the topography of a terrestrial landscape, now hidden beneath the waves. These aren't just isolated finds. They are widespread geological features, telling a coherent story of a sunken world. And it gets even more intimate. While mammoth teeth and flint tools are fantastic, what about something that directly connects us to the people who walk these ancient plains? This brings us to a rather quirky, perhaps even a little eerie, tidbit: the discovery of actual human remains. In 2013, a Dutch fisherman, casting his nets off the coast of Zeeland, pulled up something truly extraordinary: a fragment of a human jawbone. This wasn't just any old bone, it was robust, clearly ancient, and when dated, it was found to be approximately 9,500 years old, placing it firmly within Doggerland's habitable period. Imagine the sheer surprise, the sudden, visceral connection to a human being who lived on this land that we now only know as a phantom. This jawbone, nicknamed Doggerland Man by some, is a rare and poignant reminder of the flesh and blood people who called this lost world home. It's like finding a selfie from the Mesolithic era, only a bit more bony. The sheer volume and variety of archaeological finds are truly staggering. Beyond the jawbone, there have been spear points crafted from bone, delicate antler picks used for digging, and even fragments of ancient wood, perhaps from long-vanished trees or even the remnants of Mesolithic structures. Each artifact, no matter how small, adds another brushstroke to the portrait of Doggerland. They tell us about the tools these people used, the animals they hunted, and perhaps even the plants they gathered. It's like piecing together a gigantic, millennia-old jigsaw puzzle, where each new discovery is a crucial piece clicking into place. Modern technology has, of course, revolutionized our understanding. Gone are the days when we relied solely on accidental trawler finds. Today, highly specialized research vessels employ advanced sonar systems to create incredibly detailed, three-dimensional maps of the seabed. These maps reveal not just the flat expanse, but subtle undulations, ancient riverbeds, and even the ghost of former coastlines. We can then use remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, equipped with cameras and robotic arms, to descend into the depths, providing us with eyes where we once only had sonar pings. Imagine seeing a piece of ancient wood, perfectly preserved, resting on the seabed, just as it might have fallen thousands of years ago. It's like having a personal submarine to tour the sunken ruins of an ancient civilization. Core sampling is another vital technique. Picture a long, hollow tube being plunged into the seabed, extracting a cylinder of sediment. When this core is brought back to the surface, it's a geological timeline. Each layer tells a story: marine sediments at the top, followed by layers of freshwater mud, then peat, and finally, ancient terrestrial soils. This layered evidence provides irrefutable proof of a landmass that was once dry, then became a freshwater environment, and finally succumbed to the sea. It's like reading the Earth's diary, page by page, and finding the entry where it says, "Dear Diary, today I lost a continent." While the evidence is overwhelming, some aspects of Doggerland's human story remain shrouded in mystery. For instance, historians and archaeologists still debate the precise extent of human occupation in Doggerland's final centuries, particularly how communities adapted or were displaced just before the Storegga tsunami, and whether there were permanent settlements or mostly seasonal camps. Did people cling to the shrinking islands until the very last moment, or did they wisely migrate to higher ground on what would become Britain or continental Europe? The archaeological record provides clues, but the full narrative of human resilience and tragedy is still being pieced together. The area known as Doggerbank, a vast, relatively shallow sandbank in the central North Sea, has been particularly fruitful for discoveries. It was likely one of the higher elevations of Doggerland, a last bastion of dry land before the final inundation. This means it was a natural magnet for both animals and humans seeking refuge from the encroaching waters. It's a bittersweet thought. The very place that offered a last stand now yields the most secrets. So, the next time you look at a map of the North Sea, remember that beneath those churning waves lies an entire lost world. A world of vast plains, winding rivers, dense forests, and the echoes of human footsteps. The evidence, brought forth by the tireless work of fishermen, scientists, and the sheer power of the ocean, continues to confirm Doggerland's existence, reminding us that even the most profound disappearances leave indelible marks. These echoes from the seabed are not just scientific curiosities, they are a poignant testament to a land that once was, and the incredible story of its slow, watery disappearance. You now stand, metaphorically speaking, on the very edge of the present, gazing back across the vast, watery expanse where Doggerland once lay. Its slow, inexorable disappearance wasn't just a fascinating geological event, or a tragic loss for its ancient inhabitants. It was, and remains, a profound lesson whispered across the millennia. It's a message etched not in stone, but in the shifting sands and rising tides of our own world. What does this sunken world teach us, you wonder, as you settle deeper into your pillows, feeling the gentle weight of history? Well, first and foremost, Doggerland is a stark, watery reminder of the sheer, undeniable power of ancient climate change. We've traced its story from the icy grip of the last glacial maximum, through the slow, agonizing thaw that followed. You've seen how the melting ice sheets, colossal mountains of frozen water that once covered vast swathes of the planet, unleashed torrents that didn't just fill rivers, but literally reshaped continents. This wasn't some minor drizzle. We're talking about a global sea level rise of approximately 120 meters from the depths of the last ice age to the relatively stable levels we knew until recently. Imagine your tallest skyscraper, now picture it submerged. That's the scale of the change. It's a mainstream historical fact, a geological truth that underpins Doggerland's entire narrative. The planet warmed, ice melted, and the ocean simply rose. It wasn't a sudden cataclysm over a year or two, but a relentless, generational creep, punctuated by the occasional dramatic event like the Storegga slide. It tells us that our planet is a living, breathing, constantly evolving entity, and sometimes, those evolutions involve significant, transformative shifts in climate. And while the pace of ancient warming was different from today's accelerated changes, the fundamental mechanism, ice melting, sea levels rising, remains chillingly familiar. It's almost as if the Earth is trying to send us a very expensive, very wet postcard from the past saying, "Hey, remember me? I can do this again." The second lesson, intertwined with the first, speaks directly to our own increasingly vulnerable coastlines today. You see, the people of Doggerland lived through what we might call a slow-motion climate crisis. Their world was shrinking, not over a human lifetime, but over many generations. Their children's children would know a world smaller than their grandparents. We, on the other hand, are witnessing changes that are happening within our own lifetimes, sometimes even within a single decade. Doggerland serves as a historical blueprint for what happens when a landmass is slowly, then rapidly, consumed by the sea. It highlights the immense challenges of adaptation, the loss of fertile land, the disruption of traditional hunting grounds, the need to constantly relocate and redefine one's home. You might think, well, we have technology. We'll just build bigger walls. And yes, we try. We build sea defenses, we pump sand onto beaches, we even consider floating cities. But Doggerland whispers a cautionary tale. The ocean is patient, and eventually, it usually wins. It's like trying to hold back a persistent toddler with a leaky sippy cup. Eventually, everything's going to get soggy. This brings us to the incredible resilience and ingenuity of the Mesolithic people who called Doggerland home. We've talked about how they adapted their tools, their diets, their very way of life as their landscape transformed. They didn't just throw up their hands in despair, they innovated. They became more maritime, developing better boats, refining their fishing techniques, and adjusting their hunting strategies to focus on coastal and aquatic resources. This adaptability is a quirky, yet profoundly important, tidbit from Doggerland's story. It shows that even in the face of monumental environmental change, human societies can find ways to persist, to evolve, to keep going. It wasn't always easy, certainly not, but they found a way. It's a testament to the sheer stubbornness of the human spirit, isn't it? You can almost hear them grumbling. Well, the mammoths are gone, but at least the fish are biting. However, historians still argue whether the pace of Doggerland's submergence truly allowed for gradual, peaceful adaptation, or if it felt more like a relentless, accelerating assault on their homeland, especially with the sudden trauma of the Storegga tsunami. Was it a slow, generational retreat, or a series of desperate, hurried evacuations? The truth, as always, is likely somewhere in between, a complex tapestry of both. This scholarly debate isn't just academic, it has implications for how we view our own future adaptations. Can we plan our retreat, or will it be forced upon us by increasingly frequent and severe events? Doggerland also teaches us about the impermanence of even the most seemingly solid landscapes. We tend to think of land as, well, land? Fixed, unchanging, always there. But Doggerland reminds us that continents shift, sea levels fluctuate, and what is dry land today might be seabed tomorrow. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That the very ground beneath your feet, the familiar coastline you visit, is merely a snapshot in geological time. It's not just a historical curiosity, it's a living, breathing example of a dynamic Earth. And sometimes, its dynamics clash rather dramatically with our property deeds. You might joke about needing a good pair of waders for future commutes, but the truth is, many coastal communities around the world are already facing that reality, or the painful decision to relocate. Furthermore, the archaeological discoveries from Doggerland's seabed are not just exciting finds for museums. They are invaluable data points for understanding how past societies responded to environmental pressures. By studying the tools, the settlements, the very DNA of the plants and animals found beneath the waves, we can reconstruct a more complete picture of life on a changing planet. This knowledge, gleaned from a sunken world, can help us predict and prepare for our own future. It's like finding an ancient instruction manual on how to deal with a very large, very wet problem. Ultimately, Doggerland is more than just a ghost land, it's a mirror. It reflects back to us the profound impact of climate change, the resilience of human populations, and the ever-present, sometimes unsettling, dynamism of our planet. It's a reminder that the Earth doesn't care about our maps or our property lines, it follows its own ancient rhythms. Doggerland's story is a silent, profound call to listen to those rhythms, to learn from the past, and to act with foresight in the present. Because while we may not face a 120-meter sea level rise in the next century, even a few meters can redraw maps and displace millions. And unlike the Mesolithic people, we have the benefit of hindsight, the science, and the ability to make choices that might just prevent our own cities from becoming the next Doggerland. It's a lot to ponder, isn't it? This ancient, submerged world has so much to tell us, if only we listen closely to the whispers from beneath the waves. The waves continue their gentle, rhythmic sighing, a sound that has echoed across the earth for eons, long before Doggerland first emerged from the ice, and long after its last shores slipped beneath the North Sea. Their whispers are soft now, less about the roar of ancient tsunamis and more about the quiet comfort of continuity. The story of Doggerland, with all its deep history and profound lessons, begins to recede into the peaceful depths of your mind. Like a ship sailing slowly over the horizon, its mast a fading line against the twilight sky. You are safe and warm here, enveloped in the quiet of your room, far from the ancient, encroaching waters. The vastness of geological time, the slow dance of continents and oceans, is a concept now softly settling within you, a gentle understanding that the world is always in motion, always changing, yet always, in its own way, finding a balance. Let the images of ancient landscapes and resilient people drift, unhurried, into the background, becoming part of the quiet hum of your own thoughts. There is no need to hold on to them tightly. They are simply there, a part of the vast tapestry of Earth's story, and now, a small part of your own understanding. Feel the softness of your blankets, the steady rhythm of your breath, and allow yourself to sink deeper into the peaceful calm that surrounds you. All is well, and the night holds only quiet comfort.